So, for the 4th years, environmental physiology students, I welcome you to this second lecture in which we want to understand the way the body of any particular organism can adjust the way it functions in response to certain environmental conditions. So these adjustments, these changes are what we are terming physiological adaptations. And they are internal changes in the way the body works. And what they aim, what these internal changes target, is they are occurring so that they can help the organism to survive in its current environment. So you can think of them then as software adjustments in the body, while the structural adaptations, what you can see with your naked eye, the changes, for example, in the color, the changes in the clothes, in the length, those can be looked at more like the changes in the hardware. So these adaptations, the physiological adaptations, they happen inside the body systems. Inside the body systems. So you can talk of inside the respiratory system, inside the circulatory system, inside a kidney, inside, or with respect to the skin. And as we've said, these changes, they all happen so that they can help the organism to cope with the challenges that the environment will have subjected that particular organism to. Such challenges, for example, could include lack of sufficient oxygen. Okay? It could as well include extreme levels, either of heat or cold. It could as well be in line with the amount of water or even the amount of food that is available to that particular organism. We've looked at physiological adaptations which happen to be occurring inside the body, inside the body of that particular organism. But how do these physiological adaptations differ from structural adaptations? Structural adaptations, they involve the physical features that one can see. Okay, those are the structural adaptations. When you look at, for example, the camel has a hump, and in that hump, there is a storage of fat. You look at the polar bear, it has thick fur. The whole purpose of that fur is to keep the animal warm. Physiological adaptations, on the other hand, involve the internal processes that one cannot see directly. So when you can see, for example, the hump on the camel's back, one cannot see the changes that will have happened inside the camel's kidney, so that concentrated urine is produced in an effort to save water. The polar bear's metabolism as well can increase during winter. The increase in metabolism is happening in an effort to generate more heat. Okay? So, to clarify, let's look at some more examples. During hot conditions, for example, as a human being, you sweat. Sweating cools down the body. When it is hot, you will see a dog laying down, opening its mouth, and breathing through the mouth. That one we call it panting. What panting does to the dog is that it increases the cooling of the dog's body through the respiratory system. In the converse, during cold conditions, humans shiver. Okay? You shiver. What happens when you are shivering is the muscles are rubbing against each other so that they can produce heat. Remember, it's cold, so you need heat. In the penguins, their bodies will reduce blood flow to their feet when it is cold. Why? Because penguins, their feet are not covered. So if blood goes there, then a lot of heat will be lost. So when the flow of blood to the feet is reduced in penguins, especially when it is cold, then there will be success in the attempt by the penguins to ensure that they don't lose heat now that the conditions are cold. When you take anyone up on a mountain, people who do the mountain climbing, when they get to very high altitudes, people tend to breathe faster. They also tend to produce more red blood cells. That faster breathing, what it does, it helps to carry more oxygen in the blood. Okay? When you are increasing as well the amount of red blood cells within the blood, remember the red blood cells, their main function is the transportation of oxygen. So in short, structural adaptations involve what the body looks like. It ends up affecting the shape of some of those body parts. But the physiological adaptations, they involve how the body works on its inside to enable that particular organism to survive, at least in its present environment. So let's now delve a bit deeper to see how some of these physiological adaptations occur with respect to various systems within any living organism. Let's look at how the physiological adaptations with respect to the respiratory system. This respiratory system is responsible for the supply of oxygen in the body and the removal of carbon dioxide. So since the levels of oxygen and the amount of air, they differ depending on the environment where a particular animal is. These animals then will develop some mechanisms to make sure that even if they're in an environment where the amount of oxygen, the quality of air is low, still they are able to get enough oxygen. So let's see what happens when an organism is at a high altitude. So for example, an organism has gone up a mountain. So in such places, at high altitudes, the air is said to be thin. That means that air has less oxygen. So what then the body must do is that it must work harder so that it can take in enough oxygen, yet the amount of oxygen in the air is not as much. So then what does the body do in such an environment? One, you have now to begin breathing faster. Okay? So naturally, you tend now to begin breathing faster. You breathe more quickly. So what you are doing is, you are just increasing the amount of oxygen that you are breathing in. Because with every other breathing in, any inhalation is oxygen being taken in. So the faster you breathe just means the more oxygen that you are allowing to enter the lungs. The other way in which your body now has to do so as to increase the amount of oxygen that is taken in is production of more red blood cells. By producing more red blood cells, these red blood cells contain hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein that is responsible for carrying oxygen in the blood. So when you have more red blood cells in the body, it will just mean that body will be able to transport more oxygen. Okay? So you find people who live on the mountains, like in the Andes or even in the Himalayas. They have a naturally higher level of hemoglobin. And what that allows them to do is it enables them to live normally, even in an environment where oxygen is very low. So think of this as the body adding more delivery trucks when it is increasing the number of red blood cells. Red blood cells are the trucks that deliver or supply oxygen. So when the oxygen supplies are limited, you need more units that can go and carry oxygen from where it is, however little. Okay? So that is how an adaptation at high altitude can happen. What about in an aquatic environment? So when you think of animals that are found in an aquatic environment, the diving animals, these are animals that spend a lot of time underwater. One of the challenges that they face is not being able to breathe air for some long periods. So it means then their respiratory systems have to undergo some adaptations to allow them store and use oxygen efficiently. Remember, these animals will not be able to breathe oxygen all the time because they are underwater. So some of the adaptations, some of the physiological processes that occur, one is the ability to store oxygen within the muscles. How that is made possible is that you find within some of these marine mammals, talk of seals or even whales, they have a protein within their muscles that allows them to store oxygen. This protein is called a myoglobin. Okay. So what this protein does is that it lets them to hold their breath for many minutes or even hours. Because anytime they've breathed in, that oxygen is not used up, but it is stored in the muscles. So when they need it, they can get it from the muscles. Another physiological adaptation with respect to the aquatic environment is bradycardia, or a slower heartbeat. So during diving, when they are deep in the waters, they tend to reduce their heart rate, because when the heart rate is normal or is fast, it means a lot of oxygen will be needed to maintain that high heart rate. Okay? So when the heart is working, yes, but at a lower rate, at a reduced rate, then the amount of oxygen that is present, that is available, can be saved just for the brain and for the heart. Because if the heart is pumping at a very high rate, it will require more oxygen. But when you reduce the pace at which the heart is beating or pumping, then you also reduce the amount of oxygen that is needed. So there is some left that can now go to the brain. Okay? These aquatic animals also have efficient lungs. Okay? So the efficiency of their lungs is what permits them to exchange more oxygen with every breath. So once they breathe in, they get more oxygen from an inhalation compared to us human beings. Because for us, we are terrestrial, so we don't need to have all these modifications, because for us, we keep breathing normally all the time. Okay? So you can imagine a whale, or most of these aquatic animals, as a deep sea diver having a built-in oxygen tank, which in this case is the myoglobin, the protein in the muscle that is helping to store oxygen. Okay? Then it also has that ability to slow the use of energy. How does it do that? Slowing the heartbeat. Okay. In hot and dusty environment, what happens to the system, the respiratory system? So in deserts or in dusty areas, air might carry a lot of particles or even heat for the sake of a desert. And all this will have an effect on breathing. So what happens during such environments is there is a lot more mucus that is produced. Then there is what we call cilia, which are hair-like structures, tiny, that are lining most of our internal air passageways. What these tiny hair structures do is they move, they beat. That beating helps to trap dust before it gets into the lungs. So there is mucus which helps in trapping anything that is flowing down, because the mucus is produced and lines the internal lining of these passageways. So the mucus and the cilia, kazi yake ni kushika anything, any dust, to trap anything that will eventually end up in the what? In the lungs, because the lungs are fairly delicate. In animals like dogs, we talked of panting. So in a hot environment, the dogs will pant. Through panting, it helps those animals to cool themselves. By panting, it increases airflow. Okay? So by increasing that airflow, it also helps to remove the excess heat from the body. Because remember, the dogs don't sweat like we do. So they have to, most of the time, you will see a dog opening its mouth, removing the tongue out and sort of breathing through the mouth. That's now the panting. What it's doing is just increasing airflow. That airflow helps to remove the excess heat from inside the body. Remember, you can hardly see a dog pant in the morning, but you will see it pant when the outside is fairly hot. So in dusty places, people often sneeze or cough more. What you do with sneezing or coughing is just a way in which your body is trying to clear the airways. Okay? So in this case then, the respiratory system is acting as a filter, as a cooling fan. And what does that, what that helps the body is it keeps the airways clean and helps to keep the body cool. Okay? A filter, the mucus and the cilia, is filtering. Cooling fan, when the dog pants, it loses heat in the process. Okay? So all that is happening in this case is just ensuring that the body of these particular animals remains cool enough. The adaptations of the circulatory system in various environmental conditions. The circulatory system functions like the body's transport network. It carries oxygen, it carries food, it carries water, it carries hormones towards the cells, but it also removes waste products, things like CO2, it removes them from the cells. So, because animals are found in different environments, then these environments are likely to put pressure on the body. And therefore, the circulatory system is likely to change in how it works, given the change in the environment. And why it is changing is just an effort to keep the body alive and balanced. Let's see what happens in a cold environment. So when it is very cold, what the body tries to do is to keep heat inside so that organs like the heart, brain, and lungs don't freeze. So it means the body comes up with ways to ensure that heat does not leave the body. But organs that are found inside the body, the vital organs, the heart, the brain, the lungs, okay, still are within their normal temperature ranges. So how does the body do this? One is vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction just means narrowing of the blood vessels. What happens with this is blood vessels under the skin will become narrower. Once the blood vessels have become narrower, it reduces the blood flow near the skin. Okay? Because blood is flowing within those vessels. So when the vessels have become narrower, they've moved away from the skin, one, and two, by being narrower, reduces the amount of blood that can actually flow through them. So by doing this then, you end up reducing the amount of blood that can flow near the skin. By reducing that amount, you also reduce the amount of heat that can be lost to the cold air. Because remember, it's the skin that is in contact with the air, which is cold. Okay? Another thing that happens in a cold environment is the increased blood pressure. So since the vessels have narrowed, you know the relationship between pressure and volume. As you reduce the volume, you increase the pressure. So since the vessels have become narrower, the heart then has to pump harder so that blood can be pushed through. So the importance of this is that important organs then continue to be supplied with blood even when it is freezing. Okay? So the examples we give among animals, the animals that are found in the Arctic, the polar bears, the penguins, what they do is they reduce the blood flow to their legs and wings, but maintain warm blood in the chest area. Why the chest area? Because that's where the lungs are. The heart is also there. So this prevents the whole blood from losing heat while still protecting the most important organs. Let's see now what happens in hot environments. So when it is very hot, the body tries to lose excess heat so that the body temperature does not rise too high. When the body temperature rises too high, that can be dangerous. So then how does the body succeed in losing heat that is found within the body when already the environment is hot? One is the opposite now of vasoconstriction. Now in this case, it is vasodilation. Vasodilation involves widening of the blood vessels. So the blood vessels that are close to the skin, they open wider. Once they open wider, then it means more blood can pass near the skin surface. Once more blood is passing near the skin surface, then heat can escape into the air. Okay? The second physiological adaptation is sweating and the fluid balance. When it is hot, our sweat glands will release sweat. As the sweat evaporates from our skin, we cool our body. It cools our body, the latent heat of vaporization. But because sweat has a lot of water in it, by sweating it means then we reduce the amount of water within the blood. Once that amount of water in the blood has reduced, the blood will become thicker. So then what happens? The brain responds, the hypothalamus, okay, the thirst center within our brain will respond by making someone to feel thirsty so that you can drink water and restore that balance. Okay? So there is vasodilation, there is sweating, and sweating comes with the fluid balance. You sweat, you lose water, you lose heat as well. But because water has been lost, the thickness of your blood changes. Blood becomes thicker. Once that happens, the brain responds by making you to feel thirsty. And once you feel thirsty, utatafuta maji ukunywe so that uongeze the amount of water within your body. Then you correct now the thickness of your blood. What happens at high altitude? We saw that at high altitude, there is less oxygen in the air. So once that happens, that there is less oxygen in the air, then the circulatory system must work hard to ensure that it delivers enough oxygen to the body. And this can happen through various ways. We talked, one, that the heart has to pump faster. Your heartbeat has to increase. So the heart increases its speed or its heart rate and the power to circulate oxygen-rich blood. Remember, you are already breathing faster, so the heart also has to keep pumping faster. So this increase in the heart rate helps to supply enough oxygen, not only to the muscles, but also to the brain. If someone has to be exposed to high altitude for a long period, then what we call acclimatization will happen. So if someone stays at such high altitudes for weeks or even months, then the body tends to produce more red blood cells. Okay? The importance of that we saw is to carry extra oxygen. Also, over time, the right side of the heart, which pumps blood to the lungs, may become slightly bigger and stronger so that it can pump blood to the lungs faster. Okay? It can pump blood to the lungs faster. So that's a bit of acclimatization, because now such a person is becoming used to this high altitude environment. Why? Because he has produced more red blood cells. Two, the right side of the heart is bigger, stronger, so that it can handle that extra work of pumping blood at a faster rate. So think of the circulatory system as a delivery truck of oxygen. But this delivery truck is very smart. So in cold environment, it delivers to only the core organs. If it is hot, it opens extra ways in which heat can be lost or heat can be dumped. Then if you're going to the mountain, it adds extra trucks to carry more oxygen. Okay? So if it is cold, inatoa damu kukua karibu na the outside of the body, the skin. If it is hot, it moves the blood closer to the outside. If you are in a place of a higher altitude, you increase the red blood cells, which are just extra cells to help in carrying and delivering more oxygen. What happens now to the excretory system, specifically the kidneys? So the excretory system, especially the kidneys, they play a major role in maintaining water and salt balance in the body. So depending on whether the organism lives in a desert or in a hot environment, the kidneys will work differently to keep the body alive and healthy. Let's think of when an organism lives in a desert. When an organism lives in a desert. So in a desert, the main challenge is lack of water or lack of enough water. So what the solution that the kidney has to provide is that it has to try and ensure that the body saves as much water as possible. So which solutions does the kidney come up with? With physiological adaptations does the kidney come up with? One, the animals within the deserts, they produce very concentrated urine. Very concentrated urine means that urine has very little water, but a lot of waste products. The importance of that is that it prevents the unnecessary loss of water. Because remember, in a desert, water is already scarce. Okay. Still, these desert animals, they have their kidneys with very long loops of Henle. If you remember the structure of a kidney, it is along the loop of Henle that water is reabsorbed. So if the loop of Henle is long, it means more water is reabsorbed back into the blood system. If you have more water being reabsorbed, then it means the eventual product that is being lost, that is being taken out of the excretory system, in this case which is urine, will not have a lot of water, and that's why the urine will become fairly concentrated. So think of this as a system which does recycling, but it squeezes almost every drop of water from the waste before that waste leaves the body. So when the recycling system is taking back a lot of water from the waste before allowing the waste to leave the body, it means the waste is leaving with very little water present. The lower the water present, the higher the concentration. Let's look at animals that are found in an aquatic environment. So here the challenge depends with whether that animal is found in an aquatic environment made up of fresh water or salt water. So if you have fish, for example, found in fresh water, the main challenge in the fresh water will be that the water will be entering the bodies of that fish through osmosis. Why? Because the body of the fish, it has a higher osmotic potential than the surrounding. Okay? So then the kidney now will have a solution, must come up with a solution of getting rid of the extra water quickly, so that hiyo maji ambayo inaingia ndani ya samaki ikikaa hapo itaharibu the osmotic balance. So inatakana inaingia inatoka, inaingia inatoka. How the kidney does that helps to get rid of the extra water. It does that by producing large amounts of very dilute urine. Remember, it is large amount, and that is not only large but is also dilute. Okay? So kumaanisha ni maji mengi ambayo yanatolewa kwa mwili ya hiyo samaki. The importance of that is that it now ends up to prevent the body cells from swelling and bursting. What happens now to fish or organisms that are found in a marine environment? A marine environment has a higher salt concentration. So it means the challenges that the animals or the fish within a marine ecosystem are encountering is that the bodies of these fish are now losing water to the salty environment. Okay? So the sea is saltier. The sea has a higher osmotic potential. So water can now move from an area of low osmotic potential to an area of higher osmotic potential. So because water is being lost from the body of the fish into the environment, then the kidney has to come up with a way to ensure that it removes the extra salt and it also saves water. So then what do? They end up, these kidneys, they end up producing small amounts of concentrated urine. Remember, water is already lost from the body of the fish into the environment. So you don't want to produce urine in large amounts, sababu utazidi kupoteza maji. So inatoa makojoo kidogo ambayo iko concentrated. What that does, it just helps to reduce the amount of water lost. Equally, these marine organisms, fish in this case, they also have active salt pumps within their gills. What these salt pumps do is they help to actively pump excess salt out of their bodies. Maji ikitoka kwa mwili itawacha the solutes. So you end up with a higher salt concentration inside the body of the fish because maji inatoka ikienda. So as the kidney struggles to save a lot of water and also remove extra salt, also their gills have active pumps that help to remove the excess salt. So in short, in an aquatic environment, fish that are found in fresh water, they have to find ways of getting rid of water and keeping salts. But fish that are found in a marine ecosystem, they have to find ways of keeping water and getting rid of salts. Okay? Now, what happens for the case of humans in hot climates or hot environments? The main challenge in any hot environment is loss of water and salt through sweating. Okay? Loss of water and salt through sweating. So, if that's the challenge, that there's a lot of water being lost, there's a lot of salts that are being lost as well through sweating, then the kidney has to come up with a solution. And that solution is adjusting the urine output, not only to save water, but also to restore the salt balance. So what happens to humans then in hot environments is that when we sweat, we lose water and salt. What that makes the body to sense is that the body then realizes that it is actually dehydrated. With that level of realization of dehydration, then our brain will release some hormones. One of the hormones that is released is the antidiuretic hormone. What the antidiuretic hormone does, it tells the kidneys to reabsorb more water back into the blood. Okay? So the antidiuretic hormone is released by our brain. What it does, it influences the kidneys to reabsorb water back into the blood. Once water has been reabsorbed back into the blood, the effect of that is a reduction in the urine volume. Then two, the urine volume will not only be reduced, but also the concentration of that urine will become high. Because remember, maji imetolewa. The other hormone that the brain releases is the aldosterone. What aldosterone does, it helps the kidney to reabsorb more salt. Okay? Remember, through sweating, we are losing water and salt. So our bodies have to find ways to ensure that we retain some salt, we retain some water as well. The importance of reabsorbing salt, it just means it will help the body to retain more water because it increases the osmotic potential. So that's why you might realize that when it is very hot, yes, you can sweat a lot, but you realize that you pass urine, very little urine, and it will look darker or more concentrated, okay, compared to just any other ordinary day. What about the digestive system? The digestive system changes, or its physiological adaptations occur in line with the type of food that is available in the environment. What that helps the animal, human beings included, is that it enables the animal, therefore, to make use, the best use of actually what they do, what they eat. So on the basis of the various food type that is available, let's think of if herbivores are present in a harsh environment. Being in a harsh environment, it means they will mainly eat plants which can be tough, fibrous, and hard to digest. We are talking of grasses that are especially found in a dry environment. They should have very tough covering. That makes it that these herbivores are then exposed to a challenge of even digesting. So which adaptations will these herbivores have? One, they have, if they are ruminants, for example, they have the 4-chambered stomach, with each of those chambers having a role that it performs in line with the digestion. The rumen, for example, will store and ferment food with the help of the microorganisms that are found there. The reticulum will regurgitate the food so that the animal can chew again and again, the cud that we always talk about. Then the omasum will help with the absorption of water. But then the abomasum, which is otherwise called the true stomach, it is now in the abomasum that the help of enzymes and other acids will come in to fully digest the food. So the microorganisms in the rumen will produce enzymes that can break down cellulose in the plant cell walls. Okay? So that is a way in which now a herbivore that is found in a harsh environment can survive through digestion. Because remember, it is exposed to already plants that are possibly dry. They are fibrous. Okay? So it has to ensure then that it extracts nutrients from those plants by all means. What about carnivores that are found in a food-scarce environment? By virtue of being in a food-scarce environment, such carnivores may not find food every day. Okay? Why is it that they are not certain of finding food every day? Possibly because the availability of prey does not occur every day. So the carnivores might find prey today and they will not find it in the next 3 or 4 days. So what are the adaptations then that some of these carnivores have? So one, you have carnivores like lions eating a huge amount of meat at once. And then they can survive for days without eating anything again. We call that gorge feeding. Okay? The second adaptation is they have a shorter digestive tract. So because they are carnivores, it means their food, their diet is largely constituted by meat. Meat is easier to digest compared to plants, for example. So then it means there is no need for these animals to have long intestines or all the other specialized stomachs, for example. So it means then that these animals end up with a shorter digestive tract. Okay. The other adaptation is that they store extra energy as fat. This extra energy which has been stored as fat can be used during the days of fasting when there is no food. These carnivores can now convert the fat and use it as a source of energy. So you can then look at carnivores like those bulk eaters, the gorge feeding, and energy storers. So they eat a lot at once, then they can live off the reserves for some time. The reserves have been stored in terms of fat, so they can convert that fat and live off it for some time. For humans, the adaptations for humans in terms of diet. So it's true, for example, that humans live in diverse environments and eat many different foods. When you find, for example, a pastoralist community will be feeding on different diet compared to a farming community. Okay? And that diet counts or subjects these animals to some challenges. So in a way then, these humans, which are animals in this case, they should also undergo some adaptation. So in line with these adaptations about the diet, you end up now having some populations developing what we call lactose tolerance. Lactose tolerance is the ability to digest the sugar that is found in milk. We call it lactose, even in adulthood. So normally, upon weaning, that ability is lost. But it has been found that populations that still rely on milk, there has been a genetic adaptation to allow them keep producing the enzyme lactase. Okay, so that is an adaptation physiologically in response to diet. Okay, is a physiological adaptation, a genetic adaptation in response to the food that that particular human population is being exposed to. So you can think of pastoralist communities, for example in Kenya, the Maasai, the Turkana. They should have an ability, they can drink raw milk as adults, and there will be no stomach upsets. But that is not true, for example, for a farming community or any other Asian population out there, which does not rely traditionally on animal keeping and milk use. Okay. So humans generally have a fairly flexible digestive system. Being flexible means it can adapt depending on the foods that are available. And what dictates the availability of foods is either culture or environment. Okay? So on the basis of culture, on the basis of the environment, then varied foods will be available to the human population that are found in that particular place. So what about the nervous system and the sensory organs? Do they also experience physiological adaptations? The answer is yes. So what the nervous system does, it acts like the control center of the body. It is the responsibility of this nervous system to detect changes in the environment, what we call the stimuli. Then it tells the body how to respond so that the organism can survive. So the sensory organs, these are like the environmental detectors. And the sensory organs involve things like eyes, ears, nose, skin, and tongue. These are the environmental detectors who pick up the signals. So when you know it's hot, it's cold, there are a lot of light, there is a lot of sound, there is some particular smell, it is picked up by the sensory organs. Then now the nervous system informs the body on how to respond after that particular signal has been picked up. Let's think of within a hot environment. So what happens in a hot environment? When the environment is too hot, the hypothalamus will detect the rise in temperature. Okay? So the hypothalamus, the brain, what other people refer to as the brain's thermostat, that's what will detect that actually it is hot. Then it has now to trigger some responses. One is sweating, then the other one is vasodilation. Okay? Within a cold environment, still it is the hypothalamus that will detect that there is actually a drop in the body temperature. And once that drop has been detected, then there are various responses that can be triggered, one of which is shivering. Another one is vasoconstriction. Then another one is the goosebumps. We had talked of those two earlier, but goosebumps, these are formed when the tiny muscles at the base of the hairs on our skin contract. Once those tiny muscles contract, then the hairs will erect, stand in an upright position. Once the hairs are erect, they will help in trapping a thin layer on our skin to act as an insulation. Okay? So that's why when it is cold you shiver, then blood does not flow closer to your skin and you develop those goosebumps. Your body is reacting to the stimulus. There are animals which are active at night. These animals must have some adaptations that enable them to survive at night. So what happens at night? We know there is very little light. So then the animals that are active at night need an improved vision. Lazima zione vizuri usiku. Zitaona namna gani usiku? One of the things, the adaptations, inaweza kuwa na macho kubwa so that you can allow more light in. Then those eyes, especially on the light sensitive cells on the retina, they'll be having more rod cells. Rod cells are critical for detecting very little light, especially at night now. The only problem with when you have a lot of those rods don't help with the color vision. So with the rods, utaona tu, but huwezi jua ni white, ni black, and red. Okay? So you have most of these animals that are at night active, ziko na macho kubwa like owls, then they have more rods compared to cones. Okay? What about desert animals? So within the desert, food and water are almost always scarce. Therefore, the nervous system and the senses must adapt to detect these scarce food and water resources so that the animal can survive, even when the amount of food and water that are present are scarce. So the nervous system must come up with ways to detect these scarce resources. Among the adaptations of the nervous and the sensory system is a highly developed sense of smell within the desert animals so that they can detect food and water from very far distance. Another adaptation is a very sharp hearing ability, so that it can detect the movement of prey or also predators within that open landscape. Remember, in a desert environment, the landscape is fairly open. Okay. So camels and other desert rodents, rats and other things, they can smell water from several kilometers away. Foxes and other desert cannibals, they also rely on very strong senses of smell and hearing. These strong senses of smell and hearing help them to locate prey even when it is hidden at night. Okay? So in summary, the nervous system in this case is acting like a thermostat, either in a cold or hot conditions. That's the hypothalamus condition. When it is too hot, it comes up with ways to ensure that you lose heat. When it is too cold, it must come up with ways to ensure that the animal conserves heat. The second bit is the nervous system or the sensory organs, they enhance vision in the dark. Bigger eyes or more rods. Another physiological adaptation is an improved smell and hearing ability, so that with that, the organism is able to detect resources even in such an area where the resources are terribly scarce. So in short, therefore, these systems allow organisms to detect changes quickly. Then once they've detected changes, they can make the right response for the survival of those organisms. Okay? What about the musculoskeletal system? What about the adaptations of this musculoskeletal system? So as a system, this musculoskeletal system is made up of bones, muscles, and joints. What these ones do is they allow movement, posture, and strength. So in different environments, animals will adjust how their muscles and bones work so that they can survive and move efficiently. In cold environments, for example, when temperatures have dropped, the body tries to stay warm. We've seen how that happens. One, the muscles will begin to shiver. Those faster contractions, the contractions that your muscles go through. Okay? This movement is not so big to produce like a change in position, but it is enough to generate heat within the body of that particular organism. So that's why you find that humans and other mammals will shiver when they're exposed to very cold weather. Through this, that shivering helps in raising the body temperature. So it ensures that the body temperature does not drop to levels that are dangerously low. Okay? There are some animals that are found within the Arctic, like the polar bears. These ones have some very powerful muscles under their thick fat and fur. Okay? So they have powerful muscles. And what these powerful muscles do is they help them to move when it has snowed. And also these muscles not only help them to move, but they also insulate them. So they act like a cover. Okay? So the key idea here is that the muscles act as small heaters when they contract repeatedly in the cold. There are also other animals like the polar bears, which have very powerful muscles under their thick layers of fat. How the function of these muscles is not only to enable these animals to move, but also to insulate those animals. What about the migratory birds? These are birds that travel long distances. Because this traveling involves flying, it means they need very strong muscles to enable them fly for a long period of time, either many hours or even many days. How this is made possible is that their chest muscles happen to be large and powerful. Okay? So they have large and powerful chest muscles. What happens with this is that these chest muscles control the wings. Very powerful chest muscles. These chest muscles are the ones that are controlling now the wings. These same muscles are rich in mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria, they're in a town nguvu. Okay? It's the cell powerhouse. So it means when the muscles have a lot of mitochondria, then it enables them to keep generating a lot of energy for continuous flapping. Okay? Strong breast muscles, large and powerful. Those muscles that are large and powerful are able to control the wings. Then two, these muscles are very rich in mitochondria. Why? So that they can give them a lot of energy for their continuous flapping. Okay? So the key idea for the migratory birds is that they have strong flight muscles. Okay? This one then enables the long distance survival for the migratory birds. They can fly for days, for many days continuously, okay, because of those strong flight muscles. The aquatic mammals, on the other hand, these are mammals that are found living in an aquatic environment. We are talking of dolphins, whales, seals. These are the ones that live in water. So in a way then, their muscles and bones should be adapted for swimming. So you end up seeing that most of these aquatic mammals then have their bodies being streamlined, pointed at the tip. They are smooth and don't have bulky parts. The importance of this streamlining, it helps to reduce resistance as these mammals move through water. Okay? Another adaptation is that they have very flexible backbones. The flexibility of the backbones makes the bending to be easy, and therefore it can allow a powerful up and down stroke even with their tails. Okay? Remember the fins that are found in most of the fish. Then the muscles also contain a lot of myoglobin. We said myoglobin is a protein that stores oxygen. So once they have a lot of oxygen stored within their muscles by myoglobin, then they can swim for long periods without running out of the oxygen storage. So among the aquatic animals, they are flexible, they have streamlined muscles, and they have oxygen storage in terms of myoglobin. What all this enables them to do, it increases their ability not only to be fast swimmers, but also efficient at swimming. So what about the integumentary system? The integumentary system. The integumentary system in most animals includes the skin, hair, feathers, scales, the oil glands, and even the sweat glands. So because it is involving what you come in contact with when you touch an animal, it means then the integumentary system becomes the first line of defense between the body of an organism and the environment. It therefore will play a role in temperature regulation, in protection against attacks, in water balance, and also in camouflage. Camouflage ni ile yenye inafanana na the environment so that it cannot be seen either by a predator or a prey. So what happens with adaptations in line with the integumentary system when you are thinking of animals that are found either in a hot or dry environment? So organisms that live in deserts or hot regions, they need to find ways to prevent overheating. They need to find ways to reduce the amount of water that is lost. So how do they do this? This organism reduce overheating, reduce water loss by having a very thin layer of fur or hair. Think of a camel. They have light-colored, thin fur. That helps in reflecting sunlight. By doing that, it ensures that the body of the camel does not absorb too much heat. There are some other animals which will have large ears. Talk of the African elephant. The large ear has very many blood vessels. So in a way, the ear will act as a fan or a radiator. When blood is flowing through them, heat is lost into the air. As blood flows through that ear, heat is lost into the air. Then what happens is the animal ends up cooling its body. Another thing is sweating in humans, which say that when you sweat, you lose water, you lose salt. As the sweat evaporates from your skin, from your body, we have what we call the latent heat of vaporization. That heat is also lost in the process. Then your body ends up cooling. So with that, then you prevent overheating, especially in hot climates. So if we twist it and now we begin thinking of which adaptations could be present in cold environments, then actually it is the opposite. So that in a cold environment, the animals need to retain heat. Okay? In a hot environment, they need to lose heat, but in a cold environment, they need to retain heat. To retain heat, then they have to do it using various mechanisms. One of it is having very thick fur. Inakuwa na coat kubwa. Okay? Manyoya kubwa. Okay? The importance of that coat, that thick fur layer, will help to trap warm air close to the bodies of these animals. The air that has been trapped, which is warm, is what will help to keep those animals insulated. So in a way, by having a thick layer of fur on their bodies, these animals behave as if they are wearing a blanket on top of their bodies. There are some animals which have a fat layer, which we call a blubber. Marine animals, especially things like seals, whales, they have a thick layer of fat under their skin. This thick layer of fat, which we are calling as a blubber, is acting as a thermal jacket. It is storing heat and preventing the cold from reaching the inner organs. Okay? So the blubber is acting just as an insulation around these particular marine organisms. Okay? The third thing we are looking at is camouflage. How does the integumentary system help with camouflage. Camouflage is about blending with the environment so that a particular animal cannot be spotted, either by an animal that wants to feed on it, a predator, okay? Or it does not need the prey to spot it so that it can get hold of the prey. So how do these animals then use their skin, their hair or feathers to hide from predators or to sneak their way and get the prey? One of the things is color change. We know of chameleons which keep changing their skin color so that it can match the surrounding. Once that happens, it becomes so difficult for the predators to spot these animals. Then you have some protective coloration that most of these animals will have. So many desert animals, they are almost colored like sand. So you can say they are sandy colored. Their fur inafanana karibu na mchanga. Remember, in the desert, it's largely sandy. So if the animals have their fur colored like sand, then it ends up matching the desert environment and makes it harder for these animals to be seen. So then they can, in a way, hide from predators. Okay? They can hide from predators. So you can think of the integumentary system as the body's coat and shield. When it is too hot, this integumentary system will help the body to cool down. When it is too cold, then the integumentary system helps the body to stay warm. Then in times of danger, it helps the animal to stay hidden. In times of danger, it helps the animal to stay hidden. So what about the reproductive system? The adaptations that are happening in line with the reproductive system. So on the basis of the environmental condition, the reproductive system has special ways in which it will adjust so that when the offspring are born in that environment, they are born at the right time and in the right conditions. What this does is that it ensures the survival of the species even when the environment is harsh. Okay? Because the offsprings are not just being born, but the reproductive system has been adjusted in a way by the environment so that when the offsprings are born, they are born at the right time when the conditions are most conducive. So let's look at seasonal breeders. There are some animals that can only reproduce during specific times of the year. The environment has made these animals to only be able to breed in particular seasons, to reproduce in particular seasons. This is very common in animals that live in places where the conditions change drastically with the seasons. It can be very cold, for example, or very hot. So these organisms then, they time the reproduction so that the babies are born when food and shelter are available and when the weather is not too harsh. Okay? Why is that important? If these organisms reproduced in winter, then the young ones will either starve, because remember in winter, not many other animals are moving around, so the food will not be available. So the young ones might either starve or freeze because the temperatures are very low. Okay? Another way is what you call embryonic diapause. This is something that happens in some animals where they are able to pause the development of the embryo until the conditions are safe. So it is like putting pregnancy on hold until there is enough food or water, or until the body of the mother is strong enough before now the pregnancy can continue. That is embryonic diapause. The examples are, for example, the kangaroo. If the environment is dry and food is scarce, the embryo within a kangaroo will stop growing in the uterus. When rains come and grass grows again, then the embryo can continue its development. In the bears and the weasels, they may also delay the development of the embryo so that they can only give birth during spring, but not in the harsh winter. The importance of this embryonic diapause is that it helps to ensure that the babies are born only when the chances of survival are high. Okay? So that's about animals. Does the same thing occur in humans? Okay. So what we realize is when you ask people about their birthdays, there are people born on every month, every day of the month actually. So which means then that unlike animals, we as human beings, we don't have a fixed breeding season. Okay. However, there are other environmental factors that can still affect our reproduction patterns. Some of these environmental factors include nutrition, for example. When you have a poor diet, or when it is during starvation, it can either stop or disrupt the menstrual cycle in women. Once the menstrual cycle has been disrupted, then fertility will reduce by extension. There are situations of stress. For example, there is war, poverty, harsh living conditions. That one can also reduce fertility, not only in men, but also in women. Okay. When the climate is either too hot, the quality of sperm may reduce. When it is extremely cold, when it's during those long winters, there is a possibility that sexual activity will be very low. So because of that then, these factors will in a way impact reproduction in humans. The importance of this is that our body prioritizes survival. Survival is for you to stay alive over reproduction. So whenever resources are limited, mwili yako inaweka wewe kuishi kwanza, then reproduction can come later. Okay? So in short, the reproductive system can wait for the right time to ensure that when offspring have the best chance of survival, then they can now be brought forth. Okay? So those are the adaptations that can happen within the reproductive system, so that offspring are born only when their chances of survival are highest. Okay. So in summary there, physiological adaptations allow organisms to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is the internal balance. Physiological adaptations also allow organisms to survive under extreme environmental conditions. Physiological adaptations also ensure continuity of species, that is through reproduction, so that organisms can only ensure that their species remains alive when they reproduce during the best conditions possible. Okay? So you can think of physiological adaptations as a survival toolkit built into the animal body. This survival toolkit, therefore, can switch on automatically when conditions change. They switch on and off to ensure that the body keeps working. When it is too hot, when it is too cold, when it is too dry, when it is difficult to find food, the survival toolkit comes in to ensure that actually life of that particular organism continues into the next reproduction. That one mainly happens when reproduction occurs in periods when the conditions are most favorable. So being the body's survival toolkit then, these physiological adaptations will help to adjust how the organs function so that life of that particular organism can go on even when the environmental conditions or challenges that that particular animal is being exposed to are threatening its survival. But because of those physiological adaptations, the organs will adjust to continue functioning so that it can still live even in the face of the environmental challenges that it is experiencing. So thank you very much. I'll stop there for now. Listen to this lecture, take notes, and when you have any question, don't hesitate to reach out. Then we can discuss it or I can clarify it. Otherwise, thank you, and I look forward to meeting you in the next lecture.